Well, as we've always said right from the beginning, lots of businesses from different stripes of different industries are going to be really struggling this year. Last year, of course, exports were very particularly hard hit. That obviously continues into this year, and now imports as well are also going to start having problems. And as we've said before, lots of businesses are just going to go, "What's the point?" you know. And I've said it before. There's this bizarre view that importing and exporting seems to be really easy. In no way is it easy. Like I say, I've said before, I've had a friend who works in a manufacturing company in Sheffield. Prior to Brexit, no paperwork he had to do at all. Post Brexit, he's got an extra 2 hours a day of paperwork he now has to do. Now, of course, he works for sort of a large company. They've got, the capacity to be able to deal with that. But even at the end of the day, that's 2 hours that he now has to spend to spend doing this paperwork, and he's got to make sure that it is done right 100% of the time. And it isn't just the case of, you can literally send the same piece of paperwork again and again and again. It's got to be recreated from scratch every single time, and that piece of paperwork cost about £250. So you've got to think that piece of paperwork itself costs money, and of course, if you screw that up, then you're going to get extra money, and of course that can have problems further down the line. So as you can see, even for companies or bigger companies that have this capacity to be able to do this, even they are going to have problems and the cost this causes to the company. So there is always a knock-on effect, and to all businesses, this is going to start having serious problems on them, especially this year. The Brexit effects are seriously going to start biting hard, and especially just this week when we've covered the fact that a lot of businesses have said, we don't know whether we're going to be here in a year, mostly because of Brexit. And even the optimistic outlook of one of the business guys going, well, businesses are trying to look elsewhere for other markets. I can tell you now, it's incredibly hard if you want to get into another market. Incredibly hard. It's not easy. Trust me, I can tell you that from, again, experience doing business. So let's dive into this, because again, as it says here, it's business, Boris, but not as we know it. So before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button down below. And of course, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel. So this comes from the West Country Voices, or should we say West Country Bylines? I think we've changed the name slightly. But yes, the title is business. It's business, Boris, but not as we know it. Imagine you run an innovative, environmentally sustainable enterprise which employs your wife, your kids, and 10 local people. You've been in business for over 30 years and you know exactly what you're doing. You and your family have invested decades worth of emotion, aspiration, knowledge, and money in it. You've won the industry's highest awards and accolades, and whilst much of your work has been carried out in conjunction with respected marine scientists at leading universities, you're proud of your business and you want it to expand. You have a long-standing and excellent relationship with your principal customer, to whom you have sent 95% of your product, and you knew Brexit was coming. Even though you voted Remain, and you did everything possible to prepare for it. Endless meetings, questions, reading all the new documentation, voicing your concerns to the government officials and ministers, and you given assurances again and again by DEFRA and officials in writing from George Eustace, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, that you could indeed continue your business and trade with your customer just as you always had, even in the event of a hard no-deal Brexit. And of course, Brexit finally got done, and the transition phase ended on midnight on 31st of December 2020. Effectively, the UK was now a third country. And as far as the EU was concerned, you and your principal customer were still in the Netherlands. So I wrote the sorry tale of the Brixham-based offshore shellfish lid for West Country Voices back in April of 2021. And after trying in vain to send at least 2 trucks filled with fresh mussels to their customers at the start of January of 2021, trade came to a very unwelcome and abrupt halt. The problem, despite the promises made by DEFRA, the EU rules were being applied to the UK as a non-EU country. Quell surprise. Before Brexit, shellfish could be purified anywhere within the bloc because the UK was a member of the European Club, and the trade was therefore not considered to be an export. Post-Brexit, the UK was treated as any other non-EU country. Shellfish exports in all non-EU countries have to originate from Class A waters or be purified before export even takes place. Much as it may seem to be an arcane argument, and the interpretation of water quality classification differs between the UK and Europe, and unpurified mussels originating from the UK's Class B waters are deemed to be unacceptable in Europe. So the offshore shellfish lid was just one of the many UK shellfish exporters which saw its trade collapse overnight and was clearly facing a near catastrophe, since 89% of all UK shellfish were exported, most of it to Europe. So cue the blame game. George Eustace, yes, him again, claimed in Parliament on the 8th of February 2020 that the UK government had been given assurances by the EU that trade in most types of shellfish could continue unhindered after the end of the Brexit transition phase, albeit with a slightly delay until April for some species due to the new documentation requirements. Not so, said the EU. We've changed nothing, and it's permanent ban on anything coming from the UK's Class B waters. In private, and only 2 days later, despite Eustace's aggrieved and belligerent tone, the Shellfish Association of Great Britain were told privately by DEFRA that the EU's position was correct. All of which was no help whatsoever to an industry which was seeing its income, but not its overheads, dry up by the hour. Pressure from the entire fishing industry grew rapidly as it was faced with the loss of income, and for the lucky ones who were able to stay in business, a costly mountain of new paperwork and bureaucracy. Trucks from all over the UK converged on Westminster to coordinate a protest on the 18th of January 2021. The ONS report said that fish and shellfish exports fell by 83% from January of 2021, and the government blamed stockpiling and teething problems, but the matter dragged on, seemingly without any resolution. And on the 9th of February, the government then offered the Seafood Distribution Support Scheme, worth around £23 million, to try and assist businesses which suffered the financial losses because of export delays to fresh fish and shellfish to the EU during January of 2021. And that would be paid retrospectively. Even with a very small deprivation and purification tank costing upwards of over £1,000 or £100,000, sorry, should we say, there was talk of the government money being offered for facilities to be established in the UK to aid shellfish exporters. The idea was soon dismissed by those in the industry as being unworkable and pointless. The tanks would need to be vast to cope with the quantities involved, and the shellfish life of the animals would be much reduced before even reaching European markets. And once they'd been delivered to the customer, they would then need further depurification in order to, which would overstress the creatures and indeed kill them. Responding to the industry's ever louder cries for help, the Food Standards Agency, or the FSA, looked at reclassifying some areas of the UK waters to try and ascertain if they could change from Class A to Class B. The purist, in truth, the fishing and shellfish industry had been trying for more than 30 years to obtain such a review, studying the contamination criteria, testing methodologies, and relevant UK and EU regulations and directives. In late April of 2021, the FSA upgraded 11 of the 266 areas of the UK coastal waters to Class A status. These are now off the coast of Devon, Cornwall, Kent, Essex, and Northumberland. They provided very little joy for the shellfish growers, as none of the upgraded sites supported any significant export businesses. When Ipswich and Nikki Holland, the communication manager for the offshore shellfish, said in early April 2021, the situation for their business looked dire. Unless the situation was indeed resolved by September, she was going to take legal action against the government for the maladministration, for the misleading of the shellfish industry so comprehensively. I spoke to her again just 9 months later, and the offshore shellfish business has survived. But they didn't see any money coming in until the end of August, by which time, thanks to the late reclassification to Class A on one of their farm sites in Limb Bay, they had been able to resume their export rope cultured organic mussels to their customer in the Netherlands. They have since dropped the legal threat of action against DEFRA as being too costly. But it could also farm any future relationship with important government agencies. And depending on the harvest, they still export 1 to 2 20-ton trucks from Brixham every day, loaded with bags of mussels for deep for transport to their customer base in the Netherlands. But the amount of new documentation and the time involved is now considerable. And in this post-Brexit world, 3 detailed forms need to be filled out by hand, by an animal health certificate, and completed by a qualified veterinary surgeon, obtained for each consignment. Then a seal fixed to the doors for every lorry. They can only hope that it gets to the destination overnight without any holdups, and 10 to 20% of the trips do result in the unscheduled customs inspections in France. With the attendant risk of the driver going out for hours, the necessary urgent phone calls by the UK haulier to arrange a second driver or even another truck in France. And on one occasion, the UK customs carried out a random search but didn't complete the paperwork correctly for their French counterparts. This was a very unwelcome delay, but the consignment of mussels was completely wasted. None of this, of course, was required before Brexit, and it has all added cost to business. The increased admin time, the acquisition speed of special EU acceptable pallets, the 2 sets of customs agents, the higher transport costs because of the additional time it takes to go via the border inspection posts in Boulogne-Sur. This equates as an increased cost to around 30% per load, which the company has to absorb. So how does Nikki Holman feel about all this? We're just getting by. Just. Sometimes it feels as if we're just clinging on by our fingertips. And there's always doubt and worries that the business may not survive, let alone expand as had been originally planned. And testing for contaminants in the water in which the mussels grow is being carried out on a month-by-month basis with no guarantee of the result. So they can never plan anything long-term. Class A criteria met 1 month does mean for the same for the following month, and investors are understandably nervous. I asked her about her local political help, specifically from her MP, Anthony Mangle, the Conservative member for the Tonners. He said he's been out on the boat with us and he gets it, Nick replied. He's been keen to start an all-party parliamentary group for aquaculture to try and highlight the concerns and interests for the industry. Since the introduction of the much publicised environmental bill in late 2021, there has now been a possibility of continued contamination from increased untreated sewage discharges, which may affect public health, water classification, and the livelihoods of some shellfish producers. And although the aquaculture is facing new problems, it's not such bad news for some fishermen. Brexit Fish Market, which received about £2 million of EU funding for improvements to the facilities, is now the most profitable in the UK, and surprisingly, despite Brexit and COVID, actually recorded its highest ever annual sales in 2021. They put this down to diversifying the markets and the strong UK sales, even though about 70% of the catch landed there still goes to Europe. But this is of very little consolation to the offshore shellfish, a Devon-based family firm which is doing all it can to try and continue trading in a business in a world now blighted by Brexit bureaucracy, the additional costs, and now uncertainty. So this is indeed very, very bad. In fact, there's this worth actually adding. So in April 2016, the then Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor Michael Gove told the BBC's Laura Kunsberg that the UK would be part of a free trade zone with full access to the European market after Brexit. In your role as spokesperson for Vote Leave, Mr. Grove, did you ever realise the real cost and implications for Brexit and for businesses such as the offshore shellfish lid? Or maybe you and your mates just hoped no one would notice. Yeah. I do hope they survive. I really do. This is not their fault. This is not their fault at all. And like I've said before, every time I say this, we bring up fishermen, there's a lot of people love to say, oh, well, they voted for it. No, they didn't. A lot of fishermen, just like many farmers, did not vote for this. And many of them, even if they did vote to leave, were promised different things by different people. So they were conned just as much as anyone else was in the country by this, again, state of Brexit. Remember, the official position of the Leave campaign was to remain in the single market and customs union. Again, the infamous quote by Daniel Hannan, only a fool would talk about leaving the single market, the guy who was portrayed as the brain of Brexit. And yet here we are. And like I say, it's not just fishing companies like this that have been really suffering. I think this year we're going to see a lot more companies suffering from this. And yes, some companies may survive and get by. The problem is, as you've seen there, their costs have now increased by about 30%, and they have to absorb that. They're not, that's a business that isn't going to expand. That's a business that is going to have huge problems in the future. And if you start to lose, or you start to, shall we say, pass that cost on to the customer, then that customer is going to go elsewhere. And, you know, sooner or later this year, this is really going to hit a lot of businesses. And I think that the information we had yesterday, which I'm surprised hasn't got far more attention, of a lot of businesses saying we might not be here in a year, should be ringing a lot of alarm bells, for a lot of businesses up and down this country. But of course, the Tories don't care. Like I say, they're very short-termism, and they don't care. Maybe in about, 6 months' time, 8 months' time, they might care. But by then, it's far too late to do anything about it. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all watching and supporting the channel. And as always, we'll see you all